We continue the story of Ruth and Naomi. Now, Naomi had a kinsman on her husband's side, a prominent rich man of the family of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the fields and glean among the ears of grain behind someone whose sight I may find favor." And Naomi said to Ruth, "Go, my daughter." And so she went. Ruth came and gleaned in the field behind the reapers. As it happened, she came to a part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the family of Elimelech. Just then Boaz came from Bethlehem, and he said to the reapers, "The Lord be with you." And they answered, "The Lord bless you." Then Boaz said to this young man, "Who's in charge of the reapers? To whom does this young woman belong?" The young man who was in charge of the reapers answered, "She is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab." Ruth said, "Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the reapers." And so she came, and she had been on her feet from early this morning until now without rest for even a moment. Then Boaz said to Ruth, "Now listen, my daughter, do not go and glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. Keep your eyes on the field that is being reaped and follow behind them. I have ordered the young men not to bother you. If you get thirsty, go to the vessels and drink from what the young men have drawn." Then Ruth fell prostrate with her face to the ground and said to Boaz, "Why have I found favor in your sight that you should notice of me when I am a foreigner?" But Boaz answered her, "All that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me. How you left your father and your mother and your native land and came to a people that you did not know before." And hear these words from our ancient prophets, or our ancient lawgivers, actually. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap to the very edges of your field, or gather the gleanings of your harvest. You shall not strip your vineyard bare, nor gather the fallen grapes of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and the immigrant. I am the Lord your God. When an immigrant resides with you in your land, you shall not oppress the immigrant. The immigrant who resides with you shall be to you as a native born among you. You shall love the immigrant as yourself, for you are an immigrant in the land of Egypt, and I am the Lord your God." And from Deuteronomy, "You shall not deprive a resident immigrant or an orphan of justice. You shall not take a widow's garment in pledge. Remember that you were a slave in Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you from there. Therefore, I command you to do this. When you reap your harvest in the field and forget a sheaf in the field, you shall not go back and get it. It shall be left for the immigrant, the orphan, the widow. And so the Lord your God may bless you all your undertakings." For the wisdom contained in these words we give thanks. Amen.
Before I get going, I just want to tell you all what happened before worship began. I was out having coffee and I was tempted by a brownie. and I ate the brownie, and I haven't eaten anything else this morning except for that brownie. And then I was tempted by another brownie, and I said, I better not have it because that's a lot of sugar, and I'm probably going to crash anyway. And then, as the wonderful community that peace is, why, I have a piece of brownie that was set on my chair. So just in case I begin to lose my energy during the course of sermon time, I'm just going to set it right here, and it'll just like give me a boost if I need it. It seems appropriate that I talk about community on a day when I'm going to talk about community. Have compassion for everyone you meet, even if they don't want it. What seems conceit, bad manners, or cynicism is always a sign of things no ears have heard, no eyes have seen. You don't know what wars are going on down where the spirit meets the bone. Ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. Every society has to answer a basic question. What happens to people who fall through the cracks? The widow with no husband to provide, the orphan with no father to inherit through, the stranger with no clan to belong to. Israel's answer wasn't a suggestion, it was law. And today's texts show us both sides of that law, how it was written and how it looked when a real particular woman walked into a field to test whether it was true. Let's start with the law, God's instruction to the people. There's not much to say here except to acknowledge that God's instruction is clear. There are no loopholes. Unfortunately, for many people who read this text and think there are no loopholes written into the law. God's instruction covers the people most vulnerable in society. Over and over again in the Hebrew text we call sacred, widows, orphans, and the stranger in the land, the immigrant, are lifted up as the ones to take care of, the ones to show compassion toward, the ones who are most often forgotten, taken advantage of, or plain disregarded. And each time God sets forth this particular instruction to leave the edges of the field alone so others can glean, to harvest, to care for the stranger among you, to uphold God's justice. Every time, God reminds the people of their past. Remember, you were in this same situation. You were enslaved, you were vulnerable, you were taken advantage of, and God redeemed you, God saved you. Remember this and do like God did. That's the law. That's God's instruction, structure under which to live and thrive. Now, let's talk about the situation Ruth and Naomi found themselves in. They left Moab, as we heard last week, and went to Bethlehem. That's where Naomi was from. Ruth, as we know, was a Moabite. And let me just say, in case you have forgotten, there was no love lost between the folks in Bethlehem and the folks from Moab. Lots of cultural and religious differences that made it difficult to get along. So Ruth was not only a widow, part of the most vulnerable group in the population, she was an immigrant, another vulnerable group in the population, a stranger in the land, and not just any immigrant. Ruth would have been considered an enemy, or at the very least, someone not to trust or befriend. Still, Ruth and Naomi needed to eat, so Naomi sent Ruth to a field to glean. I expect Naomi thought that was the safest place for Ruth to gather grain, in the field of somebody from Naomi's clan. We know the story. Boaz looked out and saw Ruth, and the interaction we heard about a few minutes ago played out. There's more to come next week. It's going to look a lot different than it does this week. Boaz obviously understood God's instruction. The law told Boaz not to reap the corners, and he didn't. The law, however, did not tell Boaz to protect Ruth, invite her to eat with the reapers, and bless her by name. But he did. He did more than the minimum. Listen to what we are told in the verses following the ones read this morning. When Ruth got up to glean, Boaz instructed his young men, "Let her glean even among the standing sheaves, and do not reproach her. You must also pull out some handfuls for her from the bundles and leave them for her to glean, and do not rebuke her." And the text tells us that Ruth brought home a substantial amount of grain, enough to last days. Now, I'm just going to say, as a farm girl from Saskatchewan, that didn't happen very often. I'm telling you what, you want to keep that barley, right, so that you can make a living. So what Boaz did was extraordinary. I just want us to think about that. So what? So what about this? I often ask myself this question when reading biblical text. So what does it mean for us living so long after that day on the barley field? What can we glean from the story? I expect you know where I'm going to go with this. It's where I always go. You see, though this story is set in an ancient time, the times haven't changed that much. We are living in a time when God's instruction, though claimed by so many wielding power in our society, we are living in a time when God's instruction is completely disregarded. Completely disregarded. It is not part of societal structure, and people are not thriving. Instead, people are left out, disrespected, and hated for who they are. We are living in a time when greed is the law and wealth is God, where each person looks out for themselves and only themselves, takes advantage of others, and finds those actions not only acceptable, but applauded. They're applauded for doing so and reelected. Oops. We are living in a time when violent rhetoric is spewed from mouths and vitriolic discourse floods social media without a thought for where words will land or who they will hurt. We are living in a time when the people most vulnerable in our society are kicked aside, ridiculed, or left to perish. We have forgotten. We have forgotten where we have come from. We have forgotten the compassion and generosity given us by God when we were strangers in a strange land, and now what is required of us from God. We forget, and so our abundance stays locked up. Our tables stay small. Our arms remain crossed, and our hearts remain closed. But here's the thing. Though society doesn't heed God's instruction, we are very familiar with God's instruction if we are followers of Jesus. We do have a structure in place where people can live and thrive if we are followers of Jesus. We know God's law. Love our neighbors as ourselves. Take care of the most vulnerable people in society so that they might thrive. Don't take advantage of people who are having a hard time. Give generously from our abundance. Don't act hatefully to people because someone is different than you. Love instead. Open your heart and love. That is what we are told to do. Just last Sunday, Damien talked about creating our own community, a community that takes seriously God's instruction, a community that listens to that instruction and uses our initiative, our gifts, and our resources to extend the table and broaden the welcome. A community with arms wide open. A community that not only leaves the grain on the edges for people to gather, but shares from our harvested abundance. A community that is kind and looks out for each other like my brownie, a community that sits down together over a meal with people with whom we might have little in common, a stranger who has different cultural and religious practices, let's say, like Ruth. Because when we do this, when we extend the table, broaden the welcome, sit together, share from our abundance, when we do these things, something shifts. I don't know if you caught it in the text, it might have slipped by, just like life sometimes does. Boaz called Ruth my daughter. My daughter. Family. An outsider, an enemy, a stranger, a widow, a person so very vulnerable. Boaz claimed Ruth as a member of his family, and he didn't need to do that. We are family. We are all God's precious and beloved children, created in God's image, all of us. We're all beloved and blessed by God, no matter who we are or where we are on life's journey. It is good for us to remember that. Let me share at this ending time with words that describe this extended table, arms wide open mindset. These words were penned by Nadia Bolz-Weber. Thank you, Christine, for sharing them with me. Blessed are the agnostics. Blessed are they who doubt, those who aren't sure, who can still be surprised. Blessed are those who have nothing to offer. Blessed are the preschoolers who cut in line at communion. Blessed are they who have buried their loved ones, for whom tears could fill an ocean. Blessed are they who have loved enough to know what loss feels like. Blessed are they who don't have the luxury of taking things for granted anymore. Blessed are they who can't fall apart because they have to keep it together for everyone else. Blessed are those who no one else notices. The kids who sit alone at middle school lunch tables, the laundry guys at the hospital, the sex workers and the night shift street sweepers. Blessed are the forgotten. Blessed are the closeted. Blessed are the unemployed, the unimpressive, the underrepresented. Blessed are the teens who have to figure out ways to hide the new cuts on their arms. Blessed are the wrongly accused, the ones who never catch a break, the ones for whom life is hard, for Jesus chose to surround himself with people like them. Blessed are those without documentation. Blessed are the ones without lobbyists. Blessed are foster kids and special ed kids and every other kid who just wants to feel safe and loved. Blessed are those who make terrible business decisions for the sake of people. Blessed are the burned out social workers and the overworked teachers and the pro bono case takers. Blessed are the kind-hearted football players and the fundraising trophy wives. Blessed are the kids who step between the bullies and the weak. Blessed are they who hear that they are forgiven. Blessed is everyone who has ever forgiven me when I didn't deserve it. Blessed are the merciful, for they totally get it. We are family, all of us, God's precious and beloved children, created in God's image, every last one of us. And in response to the question posed at the beginning of this time together, every society has to answer a basic question: what happens to people who fall through the cracks? The answer: if we live by God's instruction, no one should fall between the cracks, because there are no cracks. Wouldn't it be great Wouldn't it be just great if we started acting like we believed that? Amen.